Have you ever sat across from someone and realized your entire world was about to change in a single heartbeat? Eleanor was the untouchable chief executive of a billion-pound property empire, waiting in a Michelin-starred London restaurant for a blind date that promised to match her elite status. But when the chair was pulled back, the man sitting across from her was not a wealthy tech investor or a foreign aristocrat. He was the man who emptied her office bin every single night. The glass towers of London hold thousands of secrets, but none were as tightly guarded as the loneliness of Eleanor Vance. At 34, Eleanor was a force of nature in the corporate world. She wore tailored suits that cost more than most people earned in a month, and her stilettos clicked against the marble floors of Vance Holdings with the authority of a military general. From the outside, her life was a masterpiece of ambition and success. She commanded boardrooms, ruthlessly negotiated multi-million-pound acquisitions, and graced the covers of financial magazines. Yet, when the sun dipped below the River Thames and the office emptied out, the silence of her penthouse apartment was deafening. Her entire existence was built around profit margins and shareholder meetings, leaving absolutely no room for human connection. She had built a fortress around her heart, convinced that vulnerability was a liability she simply could not afford. On the other side of that very same building existed a world Eleanor never even glanced at. Marcus was a man who moved through the shadows of Vance Holdings. He was part of the night cleaning crew, a job he took to pay off the staggering medical debts left behind by his late father. Marcus was tall, brilliantly sharp, and possessed a quiet dignity that commanded respect from anyone who actually took the time to look at him. He held a master's degree in literature, but life had thrown him a brutal curveball, forcing him to take whatever honest work he could find. Every night he dusted Eleanor's pristine desk, neatly arranged her stray pens, and sometimes read the titles of the philosophy books she kept, hidden behind her financial reports. He knew she drank her coffee black. He knew she worked until her eyes were red, and he knew she was the loneliest woman he had ever seen. He saw the human being beneath the terrifying chief executive exterior. The collision of their worlds was orchestrated by an exclusive, highly secretive matchmaking application called Serendipity. The service catered exclusively to high-net-worth individuals, using complex psychological algorithms to match souls rather than bank accounts. The catch was absolute anonymity. No names, no photographs, no background details until the exact moment you sat down at the restaurant table. Eleanor's sister had forced her to sign up, paying the exorbitant membership fee as a birthday gift. Marcus, on the other hand, had been given a free, promotional trial by a wealthy friend who insisted he needed to get back into the dating scene. He had filled out the extensive personality test with brutal honesty, never expecting a single match. When the notification chimed on both their phones, offering a reservation at one of Mayfair's most exclusive dining rooms, neither could have predicted the sheer shock that awaited them. The evening of the date, the rain was pouring heavily over the London streets. Eleanor sat at a secluded corner table, sipping sparkling water to calm her frayed nerves. She wore a stunning emerald green dress that contrasted beautifully with her pale skin. She checked her luxury watch for the fourth time, wondering if she should just abandon the experiment and return to her spreadsheets. Then the maitre d' led a man towards her table. Eleanor looked up, her breath catching in her throat. The man approaching was breathtakingly handsome, dressed in a sharp, perfectly fitted charcoal suit that hugged his broad shoulders. He walked with an air of absolute confidence. It took Eleanor a full 10 seconds to place his face. When he smiled, a warm, genuine expression, the reality hit her like a physical blow. It was Marcus, the night janitor from the 42nd floor. The man she had mindlessly nodded to 100 times without ever asking his name. Marcus stopped at the table, his eyes widening slightly as he registered the face of his employer. The air between them instantly thickened with an unbelievable tension. Eleanor's mind raced through 1,000 terrifying scenarios. Was this a sick joke orchestrated by a rival board member? Was this some sort of corporate espionage? But the confusion on Marcus's face mirrored her own. He stood there, the ambient light of the restaurant catching the deep brown of his eyes, and gently rested his hand on the back of the chair. Neither of them spoke for a long, agonizing moment. The classical music playing softly in the background suddenly felt incredibly loud. Eleanor gripped her water glass so tightly her knuckles turned white, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was entirely out of her element, stripped of her corporate armor, and staring directly into the eyes of a man who belonged to a completely different world. The silence stretched until it threatened to break the room. Eleanor's immediate instinct was flight. Her mind screamed at her to stand up, throw a 50-pound note on the table, and walk out into the rain. She was a chief executive. She did not date the maintenance staff. The social implications alone would be catastrophic if anyone from her circle found out. But before she could move, Marcus slowly pulled out the chair and sat down. He did not look intimidated, nor did he look apologetic. He looked at her with a calm, steady gaze that completely disarmed her flight response. He folded his hands on the white linen tablecloth, his posture perfectly relaxed. Eleanor felt her defensive walls shooting up, her business persona taking over to protect her racing heart. "I assume there has been some sort of massive administrative error," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a harsh, icy whisper. She glanced around the room, paranoid that a journalist or a colleague was watching them from the shadows. Marcus did not flinch at her cold tone. He simply offered a small, knowing smile that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. "No error, Miss Vance," he replied, his voice a deep, soothing baritone that she had never truly heard before. "The algorithm matches personalities, values, and psychological compatibility. It seems the machine does not care about tax brackets or job titles." His calm demeanor infuriated her slightly. How could he sit there so comfortably when the power dynamic between them was so wildly skewed? Eleanor crossed her arms, leaning back in her chair. "Are you really expecting us to sit here and eat dinner? You clean my office. You empty my bins. Tomorrow morning, I will be signing a merger worth millions, and you will be mopping the lobby. This is absurd." She expected him to shrink away, to feel the sting of her harsh words and leave. Instead, Marcus leaned forward, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "I clean your office because it is honest work that pays for my mother's medical care," he said softly, devoid of any anger. "And I know that tomorrow you will sign that merger, and tonight you will probably lie awake until 3 in the morning, stressing over Section 4 of the contract. You will drink peppermint tea to soothe your stomach, and you will listen to classical piano to drown out the silence of your flat." Eleanor was utterly stunned. The coldness melted into pure shock. He knew her. He knew the hidden, vulnerable habits she thought nobody in the world noticed. "How do you know that?" she asked, her voice losing all its corporate edge. Marcus smiled again, a soft, sad smile. "Because I observe things, Eleanor. I see the books you read when the reports get too heavy. I see the way you rub your temples when the board puts too much pressure on you. I see a woman who carries the weight of the world on her shoulders and has absolutely no one to help her carry it." For the first time in 10 years, Eleanor felt tears prick the back of her eyes. She quickly blinked them away, but the damage was done. Her armor was cracked open by a man holding a mop. The waiter arrived, breaking the intense spell. To her own sheer amazement, Eleanor did not ask for the bill. She ordered a glass of red wine, and Marcus ordered the same. As the dinner progressed, the impossible happened. They began to talk. Truly talk. Marcus spoke of his love for classic literature, debating the philosophical themes of Dostoevsky with a sharp intellect that left Eleanor utterly mesmerized. She found herself laughing, a real, uninhibited laugh that bubbled up from her chest. She complained about the suffocating expectations of high society, and he shared hilarious stories of the strange things people left behind in the corporate offices at night. By the time the main courses were cleared away, the titles of chief executive and janitor had completely vanished from the table. They were simply a man and a woman connecting on a profound, soul-deep level. When they finally stepped out of the restaurant, the rain had stopped, leaving the London pavement slick and reflective. The street lamps cast a golden glow over them. Marcus offered his jacket against the biting night chill, draping it gently over her shoulders. The fabric smelled of clean soap and cedar, and Eleanor pulled it tighter around herself, feeling incredibly safe. They stood awkwardly by her waiting town car. The magic of the evening was fading, and the brutal reality of Monday morning was creeping back in. Marcus looked down at her, the warmth in his eyes dimming slightly as he remembered his place in her world. "Thank you for not walking out, Eleanor," he said quietly. Eleanor looked up at him, her heart aching with a sudden, desperate confusion. She stepped into the car, watching him walk away down the dark street, knowing that her meticulously ordered life was officially ruined. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Eleanor walked into the towering glass atrium of Vance Holdings, her heels clicking against the marble. But today, the sound did not make her feel powerful. It made her feel like an imposter. She rode the private lift to the 42nd floor, her stomach tied in painful knots. Her mind kept replaying the sound of Marcus's laugh and the weight of his jacket on her shoulders. When she entered her office, everything was flawlessly clean. The mahogany desk gleamed, the bins were empty, and her pens were perfectly aligned. Next to her keyboard, there was a small, perfectly folded paper napkin from the restaurant. Written on it in elegant, sweeping handwriting was a single quote from their literary debate. "To love someone is to see a miracle invisible to others." Eleanor quickly hid the napkin in her drawer as her assistant walked in, her heart racing like a teenager with a secret. For the next 3 weeks, they lived a dangerous double life. During the day, they were separated by an impenetrable wall of class and corporate hierarchy. But at night, the city belonged to them. They met in quiet, unassuming places far from the financial district. They explored hidden bookshops in Camden, shared cheap street food along the South Bank, and walked for hours through the sprawling greenery of Hyde Park. Marcus shared his grand ambition to open an educational charity for underprivileged youth in South London. Eleanor listened to his passion, realizing that his dreams were vastly more impactful than her corporate mergers. With Marcus, she was not a commodity. She was not a boss or a walking bank account. She was just Eleanor. And for the first time in her life, being just Eleanor was entirely enough. However, the corporate world is a vicious ecosystem that despises secrets. The pressure regarding the upcoming merger with a massive European conglomerate was reaching a boiling point. The board of directors was watching Eleanor's every move like hawks. Leading the scrutiny was Julian Sterling, a senior board member who coveted Eleanor's position. Sterling was a man born into extreme wealth, reeking of old money and cruel elitism. He was constantly looking for a weakness, a crack in Eleanor's flawless facade to exploit. One late Thursday evening, Eleanor was trapped in her office with Sterling, reviewing the final contract clauses. The atmosphere was toxic, with Sterling speaking to her with thinly veiled condescension. The clock ticked past 10 at night. The heavy wooden door pushed open, and Marcus walked in, pushing his cleaning trolley. He wore his blue uniform, his head lowered in professional deference. Eleanor's breath hitched. She tightened her grip on her pen, avoiding eye contact with him to protect their secret. Sterling, annoyed by the interruption, sighed dramatically. "Can you not see we are conducting crucial business?" Sterling barked, not even looking at Marcus. "Get out and do your sweeping later." Marcus paused, his jaw tightening slightly, but he kept his voice perfectly even. "I apologize, sir. I was instructed to clear the recycling before the shredding team arrives." He moved quietly towards the corner bins. Sterling sneered, leaning back in his leather chair. "These people are completely clueless," Sterling muttered to Eleanor, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "You have to treat them like slow children, Eleanor." Honestly, the incompetence of the lower classes is exhausting. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Eleanor felt a violent surge of anger explode in her chest. She looked at Marcus. He was standing perfectly still, his back to them, his hands gripping the edge of the plastic bin so hard his knuckles were white. The indignity of the moment was crushing. Eleanor opened her mouth to scream at Sterling, to fire him on the spot, to defend the man she was falling deeply in love with. But the words died in her throat. If she defended a janitor too passionately, Sterling would investigate. The board would find out. The multi-million-pound merger could collapse. The scandal would be front-page news in the Financial Times. Trapped by her own empire, Eleanor chose silence. She looked away, staring down at the contract, a sickening wave of cowardice washing over her. Marcus finished his task in total silence. He did not look at her as he wheeled his trolley out of the room. The soft click of the door closing sounded like a gunshot in Eleanor's ears. She felt physically ill. The next morning, she arrived early, desperate to find a note, a sign, anything. But her desk was completely empty. The bins had been emptied by someone else. When she accessed the staff roster through HR, her worst fear was confirmed. Marcus had requested an immediate transfer to the basement levels, ensuring he would never cross paths with her again. Eleanor sat in her massive, expensive chair, surrounded by luxury, and realized that she had traded the only real thing in her life to protect a fragile, empty corporate image. The basement of Vance Holdings was a stark contrast to the penthouse suite. It was a labyrinth of concrete corridors, humming pipes, and flickering fluorescent lights. Marcus pushed his heavy cart through the damp halls, his face set in a stony, emotionless mask. The heartbreak sitting in his chest was a heavy, suffocating weight. He had known the risks of getting involved with a woman who lived in the clouds. He had warned himself that her world would eventually demand a sacrifice, and he was the easiest thing to discard. The silence in Eleanor's office had been his ultimate answer. She had chosen her status over his dignity. He did not hate her for it. He understood the vicious nature of her reality, but understanding it did not stop the profound ache of losing the brilliant, vulnerable woman he had come to love. Upstairs, Eleanor's life was unraveling at an alarming pace. The merger was finalized, securing her position as the undisputed queen of the London property market, but the victory tasted like ash in her mouth. She attended the celebratory galas, drank the finest champagne, and smiled for the cameras, feeling entirely hollow inside. She could not sleep. Without Marcus's quiet reassurance, the pressure of her job began to crush her. She lost her sharp edge in meetings, snapping at her assistants and staring blankly out of her massive windows. Julian Sterling noticed her distraction and began circling like a shark, spreading whispers amongst the shareholders that the chief executive was suffering from burnout. Her sister called, concerned about her dramatic weight loss and dark circles. Eleanor pushed everyone away, drowning in the bitter reality of her own choices. 2 weeks of misery passed before Eleanor reached her breaking point. It was a Tuesday night, pouring with rain again. She was sitting on the floor of her luxurious apartment, surrounded by expensive art and custom furniture, holding the small paper napkin Marcus had left on her desk. To love someone is to see a miracle, invisible to others. She stared at the words until the ink blurred beneath her tears. What was the point of all this power if she lacked the courage to stand by the man who made her feel alive? She had spent her entire life building an empire to avoid feeling vulnerable, but in doing so, she had built her own prison. She wiped her eyes, a sudden, fierce determination igniting in her chest. She was Eleanor Vance. She did not surrender to fear. The next evening, the company was hosting its annual charity gala in the grand ballroom of a historic London hotel. It was the most important social event of the corporate calendar. The press was waiting outside, cameras flashing as billionaires, and politicians stepped out of their luxury vehicles. Eleanor arrived in her chauffeur-driven car, wearing a breathtaking midnight blue gown. But she did not walk up the red carpet. Instead, she instructed her driver to take her to the service entrance at the back of the hotel. The driver looked confused, but obeyed. Eleanor stepped out into the damp alleyway, her heels splashing in small puddles, and walked straight through the heavy metal doors of the staff entrance, bypassing the bewildered security guards. She navigated the chaotic kitchens, dodging waiters carrying trays of caviar and champagne. She knew the catering company used by Vance Holdings, and she knew Marcus had taken a second shift serving drinks to afford his mother's new medication. She finally found him in the staging area, adjusting a tray of crystal glasses. He was wearing a stiff white serving jacket, looking exhausted. When he looked up and saw her standing there, a vision in high fashion among the stainless steel counters, he froze. The bustling noise of the kitchen seemed to fade away entirely. Eleanor walked up to him, her heart pounding furiously against her ribs. She did not care who was watching. She did not care about the gossip. "You are right," Eleanor said, her voice trembling but incredibly clear. "I was a coward. I let them make you invisible. But I refuse to spend the rest of my life in a glass tower without you. Please, Marcus." "Put the tray down." Marcus stared at her, the hurt and caution warring in his dark eyes. The kitchen staff around them had completely stopped working, staring in utter shock at the chief executive standing in the prep area. "Eleanor, you do not know what you are doing," Marcus whispered softly, his voice full of warning. "If you walk out there with me, the board will tear you to pieces. Sterling will use it to ruin your reputation." Eleanor stepped closer, reaching out to gently take the heavy silver tray from his hands. She placed it firmly on the counter. "Let them try," she said, a fierce, blazing smile breaking across her face. "I built that company. I can build another one if I have to, but I cannot build another you. I am asking you to be my date to this gala, Marcus. Not as a secret, as my equal." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sound of the orchestra playing in the grand ballroom. Marcus looked deep into her eyes, searching for any trace of hesitation or regret. He found absolutely none, only a wild, brilliant courage. Slowly, a smile spread across his face, transforming his exhausted features into something radiant. He reached up, untied his serving apron, and tossed it onto the counter. He straightened his white jacket, offering her his arm with the grace of a nobleman. "Well then, Miss Vance," Marcus said, his eyes shining with profound affection, "let us go and ruin your perfectly good reputation." Eleanor slipped her hand through his arm, feeling a surge of invincible strength rush through her veins. Together, they walked out of the kitchen and towards the grand double doors of the ballroom. When they entered the main hall, the reaction was instantaneous and explosive. The room, filled with hundreds of London's elite, slowly fell into a stunned, deafening silence. The orchestra faltered for a brief second before regaining its rhythm. Julian Sterling, who was holding court near the centerpiece ice sculpture, dropped his champagne flute. It shattered against the marble floor, the sharp sound echoing loudly. Eleanor held her head high, her grip on Marcus's arm steady and proud. They walked directly into the center of the room. Whispers ignited like wildfire. People recognized Marcus from the office corridors. The scandal was unfolding live, right before their eyes. Sterling recovered his shock and marched towards them, his face purple with outrage. "Eleanor, what is the meaning of this?" Sterling hissed, his eyes darting to Marcus in disgust. "Have you completely lost your mind bringing the help to a black tie event?" Eleanor did not shrink back. She stood her ground, radiating absolute authority. "Julian, I would like to introduce you to Marcus," Eleanor said, her voice projecting clearly over the immediate crowd. "He is my partner, and if you ever refer to him, or anyone else in my building, as the help again, I will personally ensure you are removed from the board by Monday morning." Sterling was utterly speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a trapped fish. Marcus looked at Sterling calmly, his posture immaculate. "It is a pleasure to formally meet you, Julian," Marcus said smoothly, his tone laced with effortless intelligence. "I read your recent proposal on the European market expansion. A bit derivative of the 2018 Frankfurt model, but an admirable attempt nonetheless." A few nearby investors chuckled, instantly shifting the power dynamic. Sterling turned on his heel and stormed away in utter humiliation. That night changed the trajectory of Eleanor's life forever. The photographs of the chief, executive, and the janitor were plastered across the financial papers the next day. The board panicked, but Eleanor held firm, threatening to take her shares and leave. They backed down. Within a year, Eleanor stepped down as the chief executive, taking a less demanding role as a silent chairwoman. She used her vast wealth to fund Marcus's community center, building a state-of-the-art educational facility in South London. They stood side by side on the opening day, cutting the ribbon together. The corporate world had taught Eleanor how to accumulate money, but it was the man with the mop who finally taught her how to live. She had lost her pristine social standing, but she had gained a universe of warmth, proving that the greatest empire a person can build is a home within another, human heart. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Life often tricks us into believing that our worth is tied to our job titles, our bank accounts, or the clothes we wear. We build walls of status and prestige to protect ourselves, forgetting that true connection requires us to step out from behind those barriers. Eleanor and Marcus remind us that empathy, courage, and love are the only currencies that genuinely matter in the end. It takes bravery to see someone for who they truly are, and even more bravery to let yourself be seen. If this story touched your heart, please remember to be kind to the invisible people around you. They might just hold the key to a beautiful world you never knew existed. Subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed this journey. And until next time, keep your heart open to the unexpected.
बॉलीवुड के बादशाह शाहरुख खान एक बार अपनी फिल्म की शूटिंग के दौरान मुंबई की एक तंग गली से गुजर रहे थे कि उनकी नज़र एक बूढ़े और खस्ता हाल सब्जी फरोश पर पड़ी जो सड़क किनारे अकेला बैठा अपनी किस्मत को रो रहा था क्योंकि इसकी तमाम सब्जियां तपती धूप में मुरझा चुकी थीं और उसके पास घर ले जाने के लिए 1 रुपया भी ना था। शाहरुख खान ने अपनी गाड़ी रुकवाई, इस गरीब शख्स के पास जाकर ज़मीन पर बैठ गए और न सिर्फ इसकी तमाम खराब सब्जियां दुगनी कीमत पर खरीद लें बल्कि इसकी ईमानदारी और मेहनत से मुतासिर होकर इसे अपने बंगले मिन्नत के करीब एक साफ सुथरी और पक्की दुकान भी तोहफे में दे दी। शाहरुख खान की इस अचानक और हमदर्दाना मुलाकात ने इस बूढ़े सब्जी फरोश की जिंदगी को अंधेरों से निकालकर खुशहाली की रोशनी में बदल दिया और इस दिन के बाद इस गरीब शख्स ने जाना कि असल हीरो सिर्फ फिल्मी पर्दे पर ही नहीं बल्कि हकीकी जिंदगी में भी लोगों के दिल जीतना जानते हैं।